Welcome to Grade 1 View, the podcast for future CRNAs by future CRNAs. A new series of Beyond the Mask supported by AANA.
Whether you're about to graduate from a nurse anesthesia program, trying to get accepted to nursing school, or you're somewhere in between.
This podcast is a resource and safe space for all things nurse anesthesia.
We're your host team. I'm Kevin Chem.
I'm Olivia Kahn.
I'm Charity Garno.
And I'm Larry Sears. So grab your Mac or your Miller, turn up your flows, and get ready, because this is Grade 1 View.
Welcome back to Grade 1 View. I'm Kevin Chem, joined by Charity Garno. Today we're joined by Dr. Erik Rauch. Dr. Rauch has practiced clinically as a CRNA for over 17 years in a variety of settings, including level 1 trauma hospitals, high-risk OB facilities, ASCs, and everything in between. He just started a new role as Chief Clinical Officer of an up-and-coming CRNA anesthesia management company. In addition to his clinical leadership duties, Erik Rauch is a part-time assistant professor for the nursing anesthesia program at the University of South Florida, where he served as program director from 2011 to 2014. In 2015, he became one of a select number of CRNAs to receive the NBCRNA credential in non-surgical pain management. Erik Rauch has served in multiple roles at the state association level, including the role of president for the Florida Association of Nurse Anesthetists from 2017 to 2018. In May of 2021, he completed the Executive MBA program at University of South Florida and was elected to the AANA Board of Directors. In May 2023, he was elected to the AANA Board to the role of treasurer, and in May 2024, he was reelected to the AANA Board for a third term. Erik, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me and getting through all that. Appreciate it.
Yes, of course. We can always, we can look at that again to make sure we got everything. I was just thinking in my head, Charity has to call us Dr. Rauch and Dr. Chem, but then I can just call you Erik now. That's the rules of CRNA world, right?
That is the rules. You are correct.
All right, let's do it. So you've obviously gone above and beyond the call of duty as a nurse anesthetist. I feel like a good amount of us, to no fault, and there's nothing wrong with it. We go through the hell that is school, pass boards, we get our job, and then we coast. What has motivated you to keep up with your roles, expand your scope of practice, and do things both in leadership, teaching, and advocacy?
Well, I would say that most of us are overachievers, right? We're highly motivated individuals. And shortly after graduating school and getting my first job, there was still that desire that I, wanted to do more, right? If you, are willing, there's many, many opportunities out there in our profession, right? That's one of the great things about our profession. There's so many opportunities to do something bigger and greater. And it didn't take very long for those doors to kind of open for me. And once they opened, I was always willing to put my foot through it and put the toe in the water on the other side to kind of see where it would lead to. And sometimes it led to some crazy things. I mean, I went down some crazy journeys in my career. It's hard for me to believe it's been 17 years, but I feel like I've done a lot, almost a little bit of everything in that time frame. And I still got a little bit more that I want to accomplish, obviously, of course.
Yeah. I mean, do you have a favorite avenue? I feel like people I know who have been in the game for a while, they try everything and they eventually find their thing. Does that make sense? Do you have a thing, or do you still having kind of a hand in each jar, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, probably my biggest downside is I have a hard time saying no to stuff.
Yeah.
As you can see from my resume, I'm right now I'm in this chief clinical officer position, right, with this new company. And I'm really managing the day-to-day operations of the whole thing. And this is a CRNA only group. This is my first time actually working with a completely only CRNA run anesthesia management company, which is really cool, especially in the state of Florida, because we have, still some restrictive supervision language in our statutes, which makes it a little bit challenging to run a company like this. But we're doing actually very well. And it kind of just shows that economics is really driving the healthcare policy changes that are happening across the country. And CRNAs obviously fit into that big time. I still teach part-time, right? I just literally recertified my national certification for pain management. I'm still just dabbing myself into different things. I'm on the AANA board, for God's sakes. And I'm advocating at every level, right? So it's hard for me to say I just find one little niche and I just stick in it. I kind of feel like I can help in a lot of different areas. But I would probably say, obviously right now, clearly my biggest focus is this new role in this leadership position with the CRNA management company.
It's funny you bring that up, Eric, because that was actually what I wanted to ask you next. I wanted to ask you more about that role as Chief Clinical Officer of your new CRNA management company. I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how it would pertain to us as SRNAs graduating and how we can prepare ourselves to be ready for what that looks like in the future for us as new grad CRNAs.
Well, the name of the company is Outpatient Anesthesia Solutions. I got the shirt on right here, right, and their little logo. And I would say what we're seeing happening from just a strictly anesthesia labor market force situation is in the ambulatory surgical center world, they are getting absolutely crushed with what we call like level stipends, right? Meaning every basically contract, it used to not be this way 10 years ago, but now today, just the way with salaries going up for anesthesia providers and reimbursement constantly being attacked and cut, when you have, revenue coming in, going down and cost of labor going up, basically what happens is the facility ends up having to eat the difference, right? So every facility these days, hospital or surgery center, is paying what we call a stipend to offset that cost because nobody's in business to lose money, right? So no, we're not going to obviously run the business and lose money. They have to pay a stipend to make sure that we have at least a little bit of profit margin. Otherwise, there's no point in doing the business. That being said, hospitals have much bigger or deeper pockets, and surgery centers do not. Surgery centers are completely volume dependent based on how much surgery is happening that month. They live and die by that. Hospitals, if surgery is down 1 month, they pull from different departments to try to make up for that loss to pay the stipend. Surgery centers all of a sudden are trying to desperately find ways to lower that cost of that stipend because it's just becoming too much for them. And many of them are closing because they can't pay the stipend. And it's strictly anesthesia related. So all of a sudden now what used to be a taboo thing of using CRNA only models is all of a sudden becoming like the hottest thing on the market. So we're seeing surgery centers desperately reaching out, trying to find who can run a CRNA only model. Can you tell us the legalities of that? How does that work in the state? Is the surgeon liability related to that? Yada, yada, yada. The company that I'm with now is like only started 4 years ago and they're just growing exponentially. And then they got to a point now where it's not really a mom and pop shop anymore. And they were like, this is becoming a little bit difficult to manage. We're kind of getting pretty large and the calls are coming every single week. So we need to try to bring in somebody who has some level of corporate experience to maybe help bridge us to that next level to where we're becoming more of like a corporation and structured that way to kind of continue to build long term. But it's very exciting, right? Because what that means is now there's tremendous opportunity for CRNAs in the market to practice independently, autonomously, and so on, which is a huge satisfaction thing, right? That being said, the question then becomes, do we have enough CRNAs prepared to work in that setting? And as the growth occurs, you start to wonder, well, where do new grads fall into that, right? And we're kind of riding this line right now, and they brought me on, and obviously I teach at the University of South Florida, and I know what kind of education they get. And, the biggest piece of the matter when you're working in those settings is one, can you do blocks, right? Blocks is a big deal, ultrasound blocks. And two, do you have enough clinical experience, even from your program, where you were able to make independent critical thinking decisions, right? Because at the end of the day, they're counting on you to do that, right? You don't have someone you're just going to call, hey, come to room 2. We need you to figure this out. I mean, we do have sometimes CRNAs, obviously, that are working at the site in multiple different rooms, and sometimes one is free to come help you out in a pinch. But for the most part, the surgeon is counting on you to make that decision and make it accurately. So they're kind of at the precipice of like, okay, well, do we need to start bringing in new grads because we're growing so fast? And we're kind of finding that there's some CRNAs that have experience that can do all those things well. But you also have CRNAs who have experience who have never done blocks, right? Because it's just the setting they worked in their whole life, or they've been in such a restrictive anesthesia care team model that they've never actually really had to think too independently in those critical situations. They've always just called for help to come in to do that for them. And they have a hard time transitioning. So I think, going forward, especially as new grads are in these doctoral programs, and I'm hoping that they have a higher focus on the education on ultrasound blocks and things like that, that there's actually going to be easier transition for those folks to come into that setting than trying to get somebody who's been in practice for 20 years and never been outside of like a 1 to 2 supervision model and never push their own drugs or anything like that, trying to transition into learning blocks for the first time and doing this kind of autonomous practice, because it's very difficult for them to do that at that point, which is, yeah, I hate to say that because I'm a CRNA as well, but the reality is we just see it's very challenging for them at that stage in the game to try to convert.
It's kind of interesting, Eric. I like that you brought up that there's different programs, and if they prepare the student well enough, they should be able to cope in a sort of independent model like that. Because I've really found just from like networking throughout the AANA and getting to know different SRNAs and CRNAs out there that there are programs that will prepare you to be so independent. They'll send you to rural sites. You'll be the only one doing blocks and spinals and epidurals. And then there's other programs that, are more urban and all you really get, sure, you learn those things out of the textbook, but you don't get a lot of hands-on experience. So that's definitely something to take into consideration for us as new grads to really truly evaluate yourself as you're graduating. Am I a good fit for this? Am I prepared enough to go into this setting? And if you are, why not? Why let those skills die when you could be practicing to your full scope? I think that's really an exciting opportunity for new grads like us. So,
And at least from what we've seen from the data, I mean, autonomy and being able to use the skills you learned in school is a very high bar, like expectation level that actually new RNAs want, right? They're looking for those opportunities. They don't want to, lose those skills that they've learned. So we know that. The problem is, like, can we count on them being ready to immediately transition? Because all eyes, I hate to say this because it's really unfair, but because we don't have MD behind our name and we have CRNA behind our name, all eyes are really tight on us. And if something goes wrong, we get held to, the standard times 10 versus if we had an MD behind our name and we did the same mistake, right? So it's just the unfortunate truth. And we just have to make sure we can bridge these folks properly. The best way for us to probably do that is to probably start bringing in RNA training right directly into the CRNA only practices so that they get that, like you said, experience while they're in school. And then it's an easier transition if they want to work with us immediately afterwards. So I'll probably be working on that.
yeah, no, I think that's a great idea because at least as far as me personally, I totally agree. I would hate to lose those skills. Those are some of the most exciting skills that I'm learning right now. So I think it's an attractive offer. And especially if there's some training offered from you guys for, RNAs as they're up and coming, getting closer to their graduation, I think it would be something that would really take off. So,
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah. So, Eric, I guess, while you're here and I have someone of expertise on this subject, I think the one thing that a lot of us current CRNAs are sort of doom and glooming about is the cuts happening, right?
Mhm.
To my understanding, if you're billing QZ, United Health and a few other people are only going to reimburse at 85% rate, correct? And as you said, it's expected the hospital or, surgery center would have to pay for that, right?
That's correct.
Do you think we're going to get to the point where the surgery centers and the hospitals are like, we're not going to pay for this and our salaries are going to take a cut, or maybe less people are going to want to work QZ because of that? What is your magic 8-ball take on all of this?
I hope the first thing that happens is the surgery centers and the hospitals get upset enough that they actually will go advocate with us to Washington, D.C. or wherever it needs to be. Sometimes, we're actually seeing bills. There was one that just passed in Ohio to basically, prevent provider discrimination on reimbursement. So, which was a big deal. So we're starting to see states actually do it at the state level, but we're also, from the AANA board standpoint, I can say we're also obviously trying to attack this from the federal level. But if those cuts do not get reversed, if they stay in place, they do put more pressure, and it's going to be more pressure on the surgery centers and the hospitals because, like I said, all the companies, they're going to say is like, listen, the revenue coming in now is less. The provider cost is a supply demand issue, right? So as long as supply demand is in favor of the provider, which it currently is, I mean, the salaries aren't going to go down. And therefore, the facility is going to end up having to pay a bigger difference between those two cost situations. And I would think that they would come to bat for us and say, hey, listen, like the insurance companies are going too far here for their own profits. And now it's really impacting where, like you said, some surgery centers may shut down if this doesn't get fixed. There are other models, right? But the problem with even if you went to let's say a care team model where, they aren't technically getting 85%, they're getting 100%. When you add in the cost of the physician anesthesiologist on top of that in that model, it's at least the 15% difference, if not more. So it's not really going to help that much, especially for the surgery center situation. Like I said, sometimes the hospitals can't absorb it, but rural hospitals are in danger for sure. At some point, like there's so many stakeholders here that are then going to be impacted, including legislators, right? Because now their constituents are going to say, hey, listen, like rural hospitals are getting closed, the surgery centers are going closed. I have to drive 100 miles now to go to a hospital to get this procedure. Like, that's not realistic for me. And, somebody needs to rein on the insurance companies, because it's not like the insurance companies are just doing this to anesthesia. They do this across the board everywhere. Every year they can find some place to try to slash and dash and keep profits going up, right? So somebody at some point has to rein in. And from the AANA standpoint, there was a No Surprises Act that passed a couple of years ago, which was a federal bill. And in that bill, it included provider non-discrimination. The problem was that once that bill gets passed, it goes to a process called rulemaking. Rulemaking is where the agencies, meaning Health and Human Services at this point, would make rules that says, okay, well, now that the law says that insurance companies can't discriminate against a provider for reimbursement, the rules say that if they do, here's the penalty, right? The problem is they've never made the rules. They continue. That's another political move, if you will, that the insurance companies lose on that end. So what they do is they go to the agencies, they try to finagle them there to try to make sure rules never come out that actually provide a penalty. And as long as there's no penalty in the rule book, they can go ahead and discriminate, even though it's against the law. And guess what? Nothing happens, right? Because there's nothing in writing that says what the penalty is. And that's where we're at. So, the ANA filed basically, we're in the middle of filing kind of lawsuits against the federal government to try to say you have to make rules. That's all we're asking. Like, you have to make rules, because your lack of doing so is basically now causing these problems across the entire country. So we'll see where it goes from here with that. But, we're trying at the federal level to do it. But once again, we've seen states also starting to run their own bills, because, federal doesn't come through. You can't just wait forever. You got to start fighting at the state level.
We talked to Randy Moore about this, and it really is like we are always head to head with the ASA about stuff. And then meanwhile, they're like in the background doing all of this.
Yeah.
And it seems like resources could be allocated differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said this before, but my first eye-opening moment in regards to all of this was going to mid-year assembly and like realizing how much legislation goes on behind the scenes, and like how much the AANA is fighting as a body for healthcare as a whole. That was another thing I kind of wanted to bring up to you, because you seem to be participating in a lot of things in regards to that. So can you tell us more about the differences in advocacy between state level versus national level, and how can an SRNA like me get involved more? And I know everyone matters, every little bit, every little voice matters. So how can someone like us get involved in things like that?
Once again, when I first got out of school, like, these kind of opportunities open up right away. And most new grads will be like, oh, I'm too young to get involved or whatever. And after maybe 5 years, I'll consider it, or something of this nature. That is completely false. Like, most of the states now actually have where, as a RRNA, you can actually be on a board in some sense, right? They have positions specifically for RRNAs to get involved in, or committees. And at the ANA level, we've made it to where we have a certain number of positions for RRNAs to be on committees as well. Because, you can immediately go into those roles as a new grad, and you should if you feel like you have the ability to do so, because small commitments, these committees are very small commitments. And then once you're in a committee, usually the requirement is about 1 year on a committee. You can actually start running for the board. Listen, I'll be honest, like when I went through school, it wasn't a requirement that we went to any state meetings, which quite honestly, I'm kind of disappointed that was the case, because I feel like I missed out on a lot. But then shortly after I got out of school, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Weiner, who was the Florida state president at the time, was working with me at where my first job was. And he said, Eric, you should get involved. And he actually brought me to my first meeting. He actually said, why don't you come sit in the boardroom and watch how we do things? Next thing you know, of course, that's just the fish line hook. Like, guess what? We're going to put you on a committee. And then next thing you know, I'm on the board. And next thing you know, I'm your state president, and then so on, right? So, but it is critical, especially because we need younger minds on these boards as well. I would say we're putting in quite a bit of effort at the national level to try to help the bridge, we call it that, between being an RRNA and a CRNA and where you fit within the whole national structure, whether it's at the AANA level or the state level. We actually have a bridge program now that's actually launched at annual Congress. It's the first time we launched it for that transition for RNA to CRNA. And we also obviously this year included the first RNs and APRN members, right? Because we're trying to now even go even earlier and catch people when they're at the RN level and start that whole process, because the goal is catch them at RNs, transition them into the schools, right? Get them into schools, transition them through the bridge program, eventually to then become CRNAs. But keep them engaged the entire process and keep them involved at the state level. I would say for any new grads, like quite honestly, you should probably start at the state level first, right? Find your local state level. They're all desperate for volunteers, especially young volunteers who have new ideas, who can, help engage members, because member engagement is always a concern. And most of the members these days are younger and only becoming younger. So, we need to have fresh ideas that make it exciting for people to want to get engaged early on and then keep them on. And then they will naturally transition. Once you start getting involved and you catch the fever, which you will, if you're a passionate CRNA, then you will naturally transition to where you want to stay involved and engage. And maybe at some point you want to go for the national level at that point.
Yeah, this is kind of a later question I had, but I think it relates to what you were just talking about. I feel like, from what I've observed, there definitely is that like age gap going on right now with the CRNAs. I think the average age is like 49 from what I've seen. And that's because there's people on one side and then people on the other side and like a few in the middle. I don't know. That's just kind of what I've felt. I think the AANA is doing a great job with like, that bridge program you were talking about in connecting some of the people who have been around more, who are more experienced with the newer ones. You've obviously found importance of that. Can you sort of elaborate on like what that process is, when that was noticed that, there's somewhat of a gap here and strategies that we as a association can do to kind of bring everybody together?
So actually, over the last couple of years, we collect the data, right? Like, so we know how many people are within certain age ranges, and we know how many people are in total are members, and what portion of those members are either in the rRNA status or in the first 5-year status. And what we had noticed, obviously, let's say over the last 5 years or so, was that basically because so many programs were opening, because once again, supply demand in the market is getting crazy, right? So when that happens, more schools open because they realize there's a need. And then existing schools are increasing enrollment as well, right? Because they say, hey, there's a need, I'm going to increase enrollment. So then you have two things happening at one time. You got more schools coming and increased enrollment at existing schools. So overall, we're graduating a lot more people than we used to. And then obviously those people become new grads and are in that 0 to 5 year range. And what we noticed was that between our RNAs and that 0 to 5 year status, over a third of our total members were now in that category. And obviously they were catching up every year, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger in comparison to the existing CRNAs that are out there from a proportion standpoint. So we also looked at, what percentage of our members are not, what proportion of the CRNAs are not members, I should say, of the AANA. And quite frankly, the biggest gap we had was in that 0 to 5 year range. People are members when they're in school, right? Because you kind of have to be an associate member, right? And you get the journal and you get all that stuff. But then as soon as you graduate, you're in debt a bunch of money. You don't want to pay the bill for the dues. And then you fall off the map and you think, oh, one day I'll just rejoin. And then sometimes when you fall off the map for a while, you don't rejoin because you kind of lose sight of all the value that's going on. So hence, we knew there was a problem at that point, that we had the biggest gap forming in this area of growing expansion and just a CRNA population of new grads to 0 to 5 year range CRNAs. And we said, well, what are we doing to address these people? Why are they falling off the map outside of the fact that they don't want to pay $600-700 a year for dues? And what we found when we went and talked we did like surveys, we did little, in-person groups with a lot of RNAs. A lot of them just said, well, hey, listen, some programs are pushing it more than others. Some programs don't address it at all. And quite frankly, we don't really know what all the value is because we don't really have that experience of seeing the value side. Like if you haven't come to mid-year assembly, like you go to mid-year assembly, you see it, right? But if you've never been to mid-year assembly, you never see that. You don't appreciate the value of that. So anyways, what happened was like 2 years ago, and I'm proud to say this actually, being on the AANA board, I brought up the fact that we had this huge statistical problem going on and that we needed to create some program to help address it. So naturally, when that happens, as a board, the first step you take is you create a task force, right? And so I, made the motion to create a membership task force to try to see if we could pull together people from different age groups, but definitely including some current RRNAs and some 0 to 5 years to try to figure out what would be most advantageous going forward to help fix the problem. So we did that. We ran the task force for a year. And then at the end of that task force, we ended up not only making now a permanent membership committee, which is the first time we've actually had that, believe it or not, but also within that membership committee is now the new Bridge program. And the Bridge program is specifically designed to address RRNAs to CRNAs and provide content at all the meetings and outside of the meetings to address this issue. And so we're seeing already like some success with that. Even the RN to APRN situation was involved in that committee. And that came out of that task force as well. And we literally thought, okay, when we open up that RN membership, maybe we'll get 500 people the first year. At Congress, they had announced like that was the end of the first full year. We were at 1,500 RNs that were already signed up as AANA members. It's like blowing it out of the water. And we're just excited because we're actually seeing fruit, right? Of something that we knew was a problem and now we're addressing. So that's where we're at. Hopefully it grows and continues to excite people and we continue to catch the younger population.
I think that's really incredible. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
you had spearheaded this whole program. I think that's amazing. Something that you touched on kind of like honed in on what I'm feeling right now. I feel like you don't know what goes on until you go somewhere like mid-year assembly. But then I feel like a lot of the students that I speak with, their issue is like, oh, I can't afford to go. They could afford to go to the state level meetings because it's, an hour away, no big deal. But then they hear about mid-year assembly and they're like, okay, yeah, that could be cool, to see what goes on behind the scenes. But they're like, I can't afford the $500 fee plus the plane ticket, blah, 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 blah. I wonder if there could be some sort of program that like, I don't know, maybe there already is something that sponsors students where CRNAs can, connect with interested RRNAs and sponsor them to go to some sort of event like that because it changed the game for me. Like now I always want to be involved in the AANA. And before that, I thought it was just a formality that I was doing because I was required to. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
There is technically a program, just so you
Okay.
know, but it could probably be better advertised. I mean, CRNAs, when they sign up and register for any actually of the programs, you can click on a box to say, do you want to sponsor an RRNA? And you
Oh.
can put in additional money to sponsor somebody. Now, they don't let you choose who the RRNA is. For whatever reason, they keep it where it's anonymous, and these AANA at some point picks whoever wins that spot. And I'm assuming on the RNA side that when you apply, there must be something that says, do you want to possibly apply for a scholarship or something to get the program covered? Because otherwise, I don't know how they would know you're interested in that. But I don't know which or how many of those free registrations are available each meeting. But I agree with you. Like, we should probably look into how we can make it more affordable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be super advantageous because I feel like you just go to one of those meetings and it changes your whole view of everything, right? Now, if you can't afford to go to that for whatever reason, I will say most states do have their own Capitol Day and they go to the Capitol. I know we do that in Florida every single year for CRNA Day at the Capitol during legislative session. That is kind of like a mini version of mid-year, and you kind of get a similar feel. You meet with your state representatives, senators, talk about the same type of issues. And obviously it's a lot more affordable because usually you can drive within your state to the Capitol, right? So I would say to participate in that.
Okay. I love to hear that.
Moving from advocacy now to just kind of more out of my own curiosity, we've seen that you have your non-surgical pain management certification as well as your executive MBA. Can you tell me about your reasoning to pursue those? And I just want to know, obviously the pain management one in clinical practice has probably helped you. I want to know if you think that MBA is worth it as well to get.
All right. So two parts there, right? Because you have the non-surgical pain management certification and then you have the MBA, which are kind of two different buckets. There's about 250 CRNAs now in the country that have this NB-CRNA pain management certification. Because in order to even take that, you have to go through a fellowship program. And there's only 3, I think, in the country that offer it. University of South Florida, where I work, is one of them. And I actually also helped start that program when it was first announced that there was even going to be a pain management certification that was going to be coming out through MB-CRNA. I was actually at the time the program director at the University of South Florida. And I was obviously I've always been highly interested in regional anesthesia. So of course I was fortunate enough we actually had a pain management physician anesthesiologist on staff as one of our faculty within the program. And so I asked him, because the hardest thing to get is you have to find a clinical site to be able to do all the pain procedures, right? If he would let me do that. And he said yes. And he literally let me do everything and taught me everything and fluoro and how to do all the different injections. So anyways, I jump into that route. I went through the whole program and I was like, man, we could do this here and we could probably even do it better. So I started, spinning the wheels at the university level. How can we make a fellowship program at the University of South Florida? And then of course now today it's been in action for probably at least 10 years now. And it graduates more fellows than any other pain fellowship in the country for CRNAs. That being said, once you pass that fellowship, then you have to take a national certification exam, just like when you become a CRNA from graduating from CRNA school. And I actually then, after 10 years, had to retake it again. Hopefully they changed the rules here because, when you become a CRNA, you don't have to go back and take that certification exam again. Yeah. And I don't know why they make you do that from the pain management standpoint, but they did. And it was very post-traumatic stress disorder for me to go back and have to sit down in a testing center and go through that whole situation again. But I passed, so thank God. We moved on. But yeah, so I actually did do chronic pain for a little while after I first graduated. And it was at basically that physician anesthesiologist's center, right? He trained me and he actually said, hey, you're really good. And you can work here a day a week if you want and keep your skills up and all that kind of stuff. And he let me do everything. I was basically independent in that situation. And that was a really cool experience for me. The downside of the whole situation, which really kind of was just unfortunate, was a couple years later, he actually died in a motorcycle accident. And then after he died, that facility closed. And based on just political nature of the state, I could not find another place that would allow me as a CRNA to practice in that fluoro chronic pain management type of setting. So then I adjusted and I said, okay, well, then I'm just going to start doing more regional in the ultrasound realm. And you can actually do a lot of the similar type of blocks that you do for chronic pain management with ultrasound, actually. And so I just started learning in depth on ultrasound, how to do all these things. Hence, that became a real specialty. I teach for Twin Oaks Anesthesia as well on the side. They're a big CRNA-owned company that actually teaches a good majority of ultrasound education for CRNAs on how to do blocks. And I obviously teach that at the university level, and I've taught it for different anesthesia management groups. So it is a huge passion of mine. So I still keep the certification because, I have it, right? And I just use it kind of a little bit in a different realm, more acute care or acute pain management type of setting versus the chronic. But it's growing, right? Slowly but surely it's growing. And I think it is important for CRNAs, if they want to advance their skill set, to maybe look into something like that. It's very valuable. Now, flip side, going to the MBA program, once I started getting into, so I'll just kind of play it out. So I did the program director thing for a couple of years, and that was challenging in itself. I'm gonna just kind of lay it out to you. That situation was very unique in the sense that I'll paint it like this. I graduated when I was 25 years old from CRNA school. I was pretty young. I was already asked to start teaching in the CRNA program at the University of South Florida as an adjunct faculty or what have you. A couple of years after that, maybe when I was 27. And once again, a door was open. I mentioned at the beginning, like, doors open, you get a little nervous inside because you're young and you're like, I don't think I can do this, but someone tells you, just give it a shot, put your foot through the door, put your toe in the water, see what happens. It was obviously very uncomfortable for me at that point because I felt like I was, just so young to be able to doing that. But, you just keep going at it. And before you know it, it starts to shape itself. Well, the university had a switch in deans. For anyone who knows, whenever a dean switches, a lot of things changed in the college at that time. The dean that came into the University of South Florida came from a program at Rochester, New York. They did not have a CRNA program. She was rumoring to close down the CRNA program at the University of South Florida because she didn't understand it. It was a different beast. She felt like it was not productive or losing money. And so basically most of the faculty had started to leave, and they basically said, well, unless someone within the current faculty, including the current program director at that time, left. So then they said, well, unless somebody steps up within the current faculty to do this, and you can increase enrollment, all that kind of stuff to make it profitable, then we're going to shut it down. Well, lo and behold, they come to me. Now, at that time, I was 29. So once again, crazy as all get out. They asked me at 29 years old if I want to be the program director.
Wild.
I take that. Yeah. So I take the shot at it, right? I do this thing at 29 years old.
Yeah.
And it was my first big leadership role. And it was really hard. Probably the hardest thing I ever did in my life. And anyways, a couple years after that, I did really miss the clinical piece of it. So, but I like the leadership. So then I found myself getting into leadership roles outside of just the university and getting into these anesthesia management companies. But I always stayed on part-time as faculty, and I still am today. But anyways, I started getting into that. I started going up the food chain on those companies. And then the MBA thing came up because I needed to learn business side a lot better. And you don't learn that much business side. At least I didn't when I was in school. And it's a different language, and you just need to get that experience. So I did that. That's how and why you see that degree. And then from there, it has been helpful. I mean, if you can speak the language, like C-suite people, meaning CEOs, COOs, all that stuff, they just respect you a lot more. They feel like you understand things because they don't really understand anesthesia, right? So you got to be able to speak it and translate anesthesia into their language. And then all of a sudden it starts to come together.
That's really interesting. I feel like I'm seeing a lot more like CRNAs get their MBAs or executive MBAs. You would say that that's a valuable thing to pursue. Was it very time consuming on on top of everything else you were doing too? How would you approach that?
Yeah. I mean, well, most of the MBA programs do have you can do it part-time as a full-time worker. They know that people are doing this on top of existing working professions. And they're usually like weekend, like you're taking classes on the weekend, basically. Monday through Friday, you have off, you take classes on the weekend. So it's doable. It's still miserable, right? Because you lose all your weekends. Let's be honest about that. That's terrible. So it took me like 2 years to do that part-time, giving up weekends a couple times a month. But I would say you are seeing, yes, people do that more because, once again, like people who are outside of anesthesia, because we don't have MD behind our name, they want to see some other degree that they think in their mind is super valuable. And CRNA alone does not translate to them as like leader, and especially not a business leader. MBA though, all of a sudden they switch. They're like, oh, wow, you got an MBA? Oh yeah. And then they start wanting to talk to you like MBA talk. And once again, it's not rocket science. And most of the MBA degree probably isn't, in my opinion, anything I use actually today, but little pieces are. But the fact that I even have the degree behind my name just gets me in the door, right? And then we can have those conversations because most of them have MBAs as hospital executives or surgery center executives. And then it's just a matter of, talking their language and then translating anesthesia into that.
Did it give you a newfound respect for the suit and ties that walk around the hospital?
They still don't know anesthesia very well.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I'll say this. I mean, there's good CRNAs, right? There's bad CRNAs. There's good docs. There's bad docs. There's good executives. There's bad executives. I mean, the degree by itself doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to be good. But there are some really good CEOs and COOs that I've seen that really like just impress me tremendously. So I would say, some of the student tie guys or gals are really, really, really good. But you meet some of them that are just like making the worst decisions, and you're like, oh my God, how did you get into this position?
Well, it's cool to see people with both, more in those roles now. I really enjoy that.
But you are seeing actually also CRNAs. We know now of a couple CRNAs who are now in like COO and CEO positions of hospitals.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Now, most of them, though, did get those degrees, and that's how they kind of break into that field. But it is, like I said, this profession is like I think it's the greatest in the whole world. Like there's literally so many avenues you can go with it. It's incredible.
I know we have to wrap up here soon, but I'm wondering if you have any future goals in the near future. Are you adding any more letters behind your name or putting your hand in other cookie jars?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I need to add any more letters behind my name at the current moment, but technically, we can't officially put our name in the hat until November. But I've been on the AANA board for 5 years now. I think it's probably about time I maybe just decide to run for AANA president. So I think I'm going to do that this upcoming year.
That's so exciting. I will vote for you.
That might be even harder than being the program director, man. You might one up yourself right there.
Yeah. I feel like I might be a little better prepared at this point in my career than
Good. I mean, it's crazy you like single-handedly saved the USM nursing anesthesia program, by the way.
Right. I'm telling you.
Kudos.
Yeah. Not only after we saved it, then we created a Payne Fellowship and all that other stuff. And I mean,
Wow.
the program is great and thriving now. I can't say I take credit for every single thing, but I was technically the person who was put in that position to just keep it from closing. And then, of course, I had to surround myself like any good leader does with really good people, right? Because if you don't do that, you'll just implode. But so I was fortunate enough to get good people around me and to help make all those things happen. But yeah, it's quite a story.
That's awesome.
Hardest time of my life. But I feel like, maybe it made me into who I am today a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Erik Rauch, I'm sure we'll see you around very soon. You'll be at Edge next. Will you be there?
I will be at Edge.
Okay.
Absolutely. 100%.
Perfect. All righty. Thank you for coming on.
Yes,
thanks
thank
for
you,
having me,
Erik.
guys. This has been great.
Want to be the voice of the next season of Grade 1 View? Well, we're looking for new hosts for Season 2, launching in 2026. If you're a CRNA student or resident with at least 12 months left in your program, this is your chance to grab a mic and shape the conversation. Apply by November 1st at aana.com/G1V, or just check the description of today's show for a link. Let your voice be heard on Grade 1 View.